anything else?
Okay. Well, I want to welcome all of you to the annual or monthly, I guess, CanadaREIC presentation for the investors group. I know that when Eric said he wanted to expand into Saskatchewan, he was looking for somebody to kind of head up and get a group going. And obviously, anytime you start something new, you get a learning curve. We had a really good turnout last month, but we're going to do it every third Thursday of the month anyway. We're going to keep it so it's consistent, and we'll send notes out, I guess, next month, because we can't have this facility for March and April. They're doing some construction in there, so I think we'll be at the Cosmo City Center. We've got a theater up there for the next, but everybody will get notice on that anyway. So actually, Eric reached out to Travis and Ivy when they were in Calgary on a Rich Dad course, and the other two ladies that usually are here are down in Toronto right now taking another part of that course. So we'll see them next month, I'm sure. But if you could just say a few words, both of you, it would be nice.
So I've had a chance to meet most of you. This is Ivy. My name is Travis, and you know, last time I fretted all week about having to stand up in front of people. So this is awesome that it's only 3 of you. But no, like I figured I'd kind of tell you who I am and how I got to be standing in front of you guys. So my name's Travis. I'm a construction worker by trade, a journeyman carpenter. And for the longest time, I thought the way you got ahead in life was work every single day that you could. And the way to be a good dad is just work as much as you can and just make as much money as you can, right? It didn't mean you had to be there. You just had to work all the time and justify working, right? So that's how I behaved for years, probably about 6 years. It was work everything that I possibly could, ditch family, ditch everything that I could for work. It was all about work, right? And then it came to one of our few little holidays or vacations out to Calgary to see Ivy's mom. I just picked up a book by chance. I picked up this Rich Dad, Poor Dad book, and it wasn't much of a reader either, because I just didn't have time. I worked all the time, right? So I picked up this Rich Dad, Poor Dad book and thought it was the most amazing thing, and it was going to change my life, and came back from the holiday and went back to work every single day, like sometimes up to 5 weeks straight. And then it was 2 years later, after I read that book, that a friend called me up at 6 in the morning. I was working out of town at the time, and tells me Robert Kiyosaki's coming to town. And I'm like, there was no way I was going to miss it, right? Like, I read this book, it was going to change my life, but it didn't, so I better go see this guy, right? So I weasel my way out of work, drive into town to go see this guy. And by the time I was done it all, I was too tired to take any of it in, right? But it did get the ball rolling for these Rich Dad courses that I did end up taking. And that's how I ended up meeting Yara. It was my first Rich Dad course in Calgary. It was a course on wholesaling. They're like selling the contract for a property, and just mind-blowing to somebody who has never thought about investing in real estate anyway. But Yark was this weird fellow who hands me this business card. He's like, and for listening, I'll give you this. And he hands me this business card that looks like $100 bill. And at first I'm like, right? Like, and I look and it's Yark. He starts talking about CanadaREIC. I had heard a little bit from Alyssa and Rochelle, and this was the first time I had met them. And after that weekend, he said, you know what, like, if you guys are signing on, like, I'll be there the whole time. He handles all of our backroom stuff and kind of pushes us to, you know, keep going, right? Like, keep at it. I don't know how many of you guys have heard of CanadaREIC or checked it out. His whole idea in starting that was, you can go through the Rich Dad courses or all these other courses and spend all this money to get all this wonderful information, but then at the end of it, you're still left without a network, right? You still don't know any people in that industry, right? So his idea behind CanadaREIC, to my understanding, was to provide a place for people to carry on and keep going with that education, rather than just take it and go back to working every day. So that's how we ended up here. Excellent. Hopefully we can keep this going. Because, I'll tell you, I'm learning. Kent and I are going to go look at 100 houses.
Oh, yeah? Put offers on 25 a week.
Yeah.
Keep you the writer's cramp.
No, you're stuck.
We get electronic signatures now, so I can just do it on the iPad.
So my story isn't a lot different than Travis's, I guess. I've been involved with real estate investing for probably 15 years now, but in various capacities. And I was a part of the CanadaREIC network. And the one thing that I can tell you, anybody, is that if you get the training to start with and do it right to start with, you shouldn't have too many regrets afterwards. And what happened with me was just the opposite. I didn't have the training first. And so the School of Hard Knocks is kind of one that can give you a good wake up. And so being part of CanadaREIC was nice because I could list any properties that we had on there, especially if they were, a wholesale kind of a deal or that kind of a thing. But knowing the fellow that started CanadaREIC is kind of interesting because he's really straightforward. I believe he's a Hungarian fellow that came to Canada on a fishing boat. And when he asks you a question, it's very pointed and very to the point. There's no fluff around it. But he's also put together a phenomenal place where people can learn and network and that kind of thing. And I know that Don and I have taken some real estate courses together, and the training is really what people need, or the ongoing support is what people need. Anyway, so tonight we have two professionals here that we're very happy to have speaking for us. Kent Braaten, a realtor, and his partner. I guess you're going to be doing some speaking as well, are you? Okay, on Susan Birch. And one is on residential properties, and the other is more a little bit along the commercial line. So welcome, Kent, to the stage, first of all, I guess. Thank you.
I've always avoided speaking in front of crowds my whole life. I hated school presentations, I think sick. So this is kind of different for me. But I think it's important for people to know kind of like the buying process in Saskatchewan. I've seen offered purchases and everything like that from different provinces because we're only licensed in our province, right? And I think in Saskatchewan we have some of the best protective contracts, I would say, for our clients, not anywhere. But what I'm speaking on tonight is just the basic process. I think when I talk to Gary, it's kind of just to kind of get people understanding how to go about, getting in place to buy a house and what the steps are through the whole purchase process. I don't speak as loudly or as boisterous as Wes did last time. He's quite a character, but that's the place to start, right? Before you actually go out with the properties, that's sit down with a mortgage professional, like East Hill Grant here, with the money center. But I guess to get to know me a little bit, I'm from Birch Hills, Saskatchewan, a little small town, 1,000 people. Grew up there, came to the city, going to university, and just wasn't very nice for me. Nothing got me excited, and then I found real estate. My dad built a 23-unit condo, and I just couldn't stand how it was being handled by the real estate agent. So he bought me the Phase 1 course for real estate. I studied it, and then I randomly ran into a realtor where I was working at the time. And we just had a chat, and then as a realtor, he handed me his business card and said, if you ever want to work your ass off, give me a call. So I was bored. I quit my job, went to work for my brothers who have an electrical company for a couple weeks in minus 40-degree weather. They made sure I was working outside the whole time. About after a week into it, at coffee break, I was like, screw this, and I phoned the realtor, the broker from Century 21 called me back, and I met with them, and I mean, that's 4 years ago. It's been a crazy ride. It's an amazing profession. I think it's just like any small business. It's tough to get started. There's huge turnover. But once you find your niche, it's almost like real estate investing, right? Like I got to figure out the price of the property. Sure, I'm not going to own it, but for you to be as an investor to make it worth your while, I would be able to do my job. So I'm with Century 21 Fusion in Saskatoon. I was number 5 individual producer last year. With 93 units in our office. So I think I've learned quite a bit over the last few years. But I see it started. I think the first step is for sure go to a mortgage professional and figure out what you want. Figure out what your price range is. Figure out if it's a revenue property, you're going to need minimum probably 20% down or something like that. So you got to figure out what your risk factor you want to take into, like what you're willing to spend. Do you want to do renovations? Do you want to invest in a property that for rental value? Because one thing people don't understand about renovations is there's always a surprise. When you do a home inspection, it's to what that guy sees. Or me as a professional, I can't open up the wall. I can't see what's back there. I can't see anything that's not exposed. So when you're renovating a property, you always got to have some kind of value in there. Because you're going to be surprised with something, no matter what. Nothing goes through it. Unless you're just painting a wall and putting cabinets in. But if you're opening something up, there's usually going to be something that you can find. So that's the other thing I would say, do your homework on that, is find out what renovation costs you. Find out how much it costs to put a furnace, how much it costs to put a new panel, put in a new bathroom, new plumbing, all that kind of stuff, and new shingle the roof, insulation in the attic, things like that. Because our market is so strong, I think we're one of the best markets in Canada, in the world, right now, that you can't sit and think, oh, I like that property, I'm going to just go over. You have to know these prices right from the start, because you can't sit on a prime property for an investor. The day goes up to be the day it's sold in Saskatoon. So you need to know whether your numbers will work on that house, and you need to get right on it. The biggest thing is there's still conditions you put on it. Like nothing's a firm deal until you have your financing. Your pre-approval doesn't really do anything, right? At least until you get the documents. Because if you're not telling the mortgage broker the true numbers, it's not going to happen once your job letter comes in and say you make $10,000 less than you actually do. And I'm sure you deal with that quite a bit. So basically, my job is to find you the home you want. But what I need to know is what your property, like what your value is that you can borrow, what your down payment is, and just what you're looking for. And that's the key. And I think most people in the end need to go look at a few houses that are even outside of what they're looking for, because I found that probably half the time people buy something they weren't even looking at within their criteria. And if I don't stay on top of that, I usually lose them to another realtor because they found this house that I haven't been looking for, because it's the exact opposite of what they're looking for. So I think doing your homework on what you want and actually going out and looking at a few different options outside of what you think you want is the way to go. And that's part of my job, is to understanding what you want. Like on Friday, I met with a couple I'd never met before. They told me an area in Saskatoon they definitely didn't want to buy, and they described the house. I showed them a house on Saturday in that area, and they bought it. So that's where the experience or realtor expertise what we handle. But privately, you can do the same thing, right? Like the market's good. There's a lot of homes for sale privately. If you have the time to sell your property privately, it's possible. If you know how to price it, if you have the time to show it, if you want to take on the liability of not having a third party involved, it's definitely possible. I'm not going to deny that. I'm not going to say you have to use us. I think we offer a lot of things for protection value and just with our experience, right? And marketability. Like we spend, 10 to 21 has 8,100 agents in Canada alone. We have a huge referral network of our own too that gets your property out there. We make a commitment to you too. We do agency disclosure, which basically is I have to commit to you saying that I got to represent your best interests. I have to obey all your lawful instructions when it comes to real estate. So anything you want to offer on a property, anything you want to do with conditions, anything you want to include, whether you want to include somebody's couch, which usually isn't standard, but some people ask for furniture and things like that. And of course, and safeguard documents, of course. And then when it gets to the actual, when you say, okay, I found the house I want, let's make an offer. There's a few different steps. First of all, we got to figure out what the purchase price is, what we want to offer them. People always want a deposit. I've talked to many different lawyers, and if you do not put in a deposit, they consider you're not showing consideration, so the contract's invalid. Most people don't realize that, but they can come and accept an offer the next day and say, well, you didn't give us a deposit, the contract is due. And I've talked to a few different lawyers on that, and that on a deal I was involved in that actually, when I first started, actually almost cost the deal, because if you're dealing with some realtors, sometimes if you don't have your deposit money access to right away, they'll write in conditions saying deposit upon rule of conditions. But technically, it's still not a valid contract. So there's many different things that you got to look out for when it comes to that. I think deposit is a big issue. I don't know if anyone's seen, was it last year with the deposit check bounced on a case. It was on the local news in Saskatoon here in the Willowville area, and the realtor on the buying side never alerted the selling agent to the possession date. The deposit still wasn't there, so there was no money ever put into place, and they never took possession. Exactly. So there is issues with that. Technically, with our contracts, you have to have within 2 business days. You have to have an acceptance. You have to have a deposit. And I mean, we're breaking trust conditions if you don't. Right? So that's the other security involved. If you're doing a deal privately, I would talk to your lawyer then and put it within a lawyer's trust account. They follow the same guidelines as us when it comes to that. The other things, if you're interested in property but you don't want to make an offer quite yet, there's things you can do to find out about it. You can pull a title to see if there's any liens, any registered encroachments, things like that. You can pull a PID, which is property information disclosure, so you make sure all permits are pulled and that there's no issues with the property. So I mean, title search, you can go onto ISC, it costs you $10. PID costs you $40 on the city. So it's pretty inexpensive stuff, and we're thinking we have a sale price in Saskatoon as well, $300,000. As an investor, depending on what you want to do, most people are probably looking for under that if it's a property that you want to flip. Personally, more experience I have is I do flip some properties myself. Not in Saskatoon. I'm a small town investor because I look at the risk-reward ratio a little different, I think. In Saskatoon, you're putting a lot of eggs in one basket, right, with our purchase price. It should sell quick as long as you can keep to where you're at with your budget, with your renovation costs, what you think you can sell it for, then you're fine. For me, why not look at small towns around Saskatoon like Braaten, Hanley, all these little places where you gotta go find a house for $100,000 and the profit margin might be the same. You just have to know the market. That's the biggest thing. Because you're 20% down on 300,000 and 20% down on 100,000. Big difference. Profit margin is the same. You should really consider. The only thing about small town investment is how quick is it going to sell. You got to think of that. You got to make sure you know the market well enough that it's not going to sit there for 6 months. Cost you that difference in the profit. The other thing about buying in Saskatchewan, unless it's a brand new property, it's basically buyer beware. There's no insurances. There are conditions you can put in, of course, home inspection, to try to protect yourself. Property disclosure statement where the seller is supposed to disclose any kind of anything that's detrimental to the property. And most people do tell the truth on this. But still, liability is on you to prove if after the fact you find out that basement floods right away. You think they should have known, but it's all on you to prove it. If you can't prove it, you can't really go into it. There's no insurance on. There's no insurances on anything with used properties. With new properties, you have that Saskatoon home warranty or progressive home warranty, things like that protect you for 5 to 10 years on different things. First year is a lot of stuff like drywall, screw pops, things like that. After that, it's plumbing, electrical, structural, which are great things when you're buying a new home for sure to protect you. But there's different those put you 2 different categories, right? Like I don't think for a real estate investor in Saskatoon, I wouldn't want to buy a new home because they're at the top of the market. I'd be looking in, probably West Side neighborhoods. I don't know, what would you think, Susan? But the other thing is when you're writing a contract, make sure you're putting in conditions to protect yourself. There's many different conditions you can put in, like I said, subject to financing, because pre-approval is never be all end all. Home inspection. You can ask for an appraisal if you're not sure on the property. If a bank needs an appraisal, they'll usually ask for it. If it's listed by a realtor, most of the time, if it's a CMHC or Genworth approved insured mortgage, they probably won't ask for an appraisal. If you're putting 20% down, they'll probably ask for an appraisal of the property because they're the ones that are probably more putting themselves more at risk as lenders when it's not insured. You can ask for things like engineer's report, electrical inspections, things like that. These are all at your cost, but when you're talking the market we're in, a few $100 here, a few $100 there, compared to getting stuck with a $250,000 property that needs $50,000 of work, you're kind of protecting yourself quite a bit. The other thing I wanted to talk about was there's a few different things that people, when you're renovating homes, doing GST is a big, I think, misconception when you're buying a home. most people don't understand that you don't pay GST on a used home. There's no GST unless it's substantially renovated. So substantially renovated, there's two different things. I talked to a guy at Revenue Canada, and he said as soon as you put an old house on a new basement and you go to sell that house, there's going to be GST applied. So we consider it a substantial renovation. If you're just doing cosmetic work, flooring, paint, trims, they won't charge you GST because it's not substantial enough for it to be considered a major renovation. On new homes, there's GST all the time. There's different categories of GST, like for rebates. Was it over 450,000? There's no rebate. So usually, I think it's about between 32 and 36% you get back. But most builders include that in the purchase price because they don't want to surprise you with those. The other thing is if you're looking at investing in acreages or farm property, well, if you're looking at buying a quarter land, there's going to be GST on it. There's no rebates. It's just straight up there. If it's not subject in the deal, who says pays for it? It's always the buyer that's subject to pay for the GST. The other thing is with acreages. If you find the perfect acreage property, you think has tons of potential. There's two ways to look at it. I believe if it's under 2 acres, 1.5 acres with a house on it, it cannot be subject to GST. If it's over that, they reserve the right to charge GST. So if you buy a house with 10 acres, the value of the house isn't subject, but the land value they can charge on. My experience, I've sold houses with 40 acres and they never charged GST. But they want to make sure that they tell you they reserve the right, that they can come after you and say, well, you should pay GST. So those are costs that you really got to make sure that you know what they're there. The other thing are closing costs. I mean, this is the biggest thing I think surprises everybody because they're not talked about enough. And I know, Lisa, you think that's your job, but I found a lot of mortgage brokers don't explain it very well. So on top of your down payment, you're looking at probably lawyer fees roughly about $1,000, $1,200, and then your title. Yeah, to register your mortgage is $150. To register your name on title, it's $3 for every $1,000. So you spend $300,000 on a property, there's $900. There's title insurance. If there's no surveyor certificate, because you don't have to have a surveyor certificate in Saskatchewan, I think in Alberta you still do. So basically, the mortgage company will ask for title insurance. Usually it costs around $250. One-time fee, gets registered on your title. So if there's any kind of issues in the future, that title insurance is used to help you rectify the situation. Other things like if you can't register the mortgage in time, you still take possession of the house as long as you have your closing cash. But you can charge interest, like late interest penalty to the seller, but you won't be paying interest on your mortgage until it's submitted to land titles. Usually takes 5 days to register a mortgage. Yeah. So those are costs. So, on your average purchase of $250,000, you're probably looking at an extra $2,200, let's say. Then you got to make sure you have. For myself, like if you use a realtor, usually when you're buying it's a listed property, there's no cost for my services. So that's already dealt with the seller. So I'm the cheapest part of the job right there. Other things like gas line locates. I mean, those are a condition I put in every contract these days. There's so many detached garages or detached sheds or decks built over gas lines. Those are huge expenses to move the gas line. I know of one case where we wrote an offer, got it accepted, found out the gas line came under the edge of the garage. It cost the seller $6,000 to move the gas line. Another case I had where there was an old shed on the property, but because it had electricity, the gas line ran under it, that dirt floor. Saskatoon Area wanted to move because it had electricity and it was inhibiting the gas line. So, and as soon as they're aware of any problems like that, you have no choice. It's obligated to the owner of the property to deal with that. So that could be a huge expense that most people don't even think of. And I think it's a really important one. Make sure you pull permits, make sure you check where the gas line is. If there's no detached structures, there's usually not an issue. But that could be a real hard expense to take in, especially when you're looking at investing in property and making some money if surprises like that happen. The biggest thing is just educate yourself. I mean, take courses, like you said, take as many courses as you can. There's webinars, read articles. Sometimes I stay up at night for 3 hours just surfing the internet trying to educate myself because there's nothing better than knowing your product, knowing where you want to go, knowing how to renovate a home, knowing rental markets, knowing everything you can, so you're best prepared. That when that one surprise happens, it's an anomaly. It's not every project you're shelling out money because you were ill prepared. And I feel that's where most people are. They jump into things in real estate, and that's part of my job is to try to bring them back in. But it's scary to me. It's a scary market we're spending with the low interest rates. People seem to be able to get all kinds of money these days, and they always want to spend the max they can. Don't do it unless you're really sure. And that's probably the biggest thing I'd say. Just educate yourself as much as possible. I take as many webinars as I can as a realtor to learn how to market properties. So I say the same thing. Especially even if you decide you want to buy a house and sell it yourself, educate yourself on that process before you do it. The biggest thing, or if any of you are looking at a property, you want to know comparables in the neighborhood. It's hard for you to find sold properties. Give me a call. I mean, within 30 seconds, I can have all the comparables up on my computer to let you know where the value of that property should be. Just because I want to make sure you're not getting over your head. Because, when you look at some other places like in Alberta and things like that, corrections that have happened over the last few years, so many people underwater. Right? And I think with our market, I don't think we're there yet. I think there's so much potential in Saskatchewan to keep going and going. Saskatoon's not a huge market yet it's a great place to be. That you just got to be prepared to make sure you're not overspending. It's not hard to overspend on a property. Because people can list whatever they want, even if I say it's worth this, could be worth here. They still want it here. Unless you know what you're doing, you might buy it in here, and then you're in trouble. So that's the biggest thing for me. That's basically what I want to talk about. I just wanted to talk about just the basics of the process. And I'm not a big commercial person, so I brought Susan here to let you guys know how to buy an apartment building is, or multifamily, or any kind of questions you guys have. Do you guys have any questions for me on the process? Or
I was curious about environmental inspections. Like I recently read an article, and they were talking more about the states. This woman had wanted to start a restaurant business, right? And she bought this property, and the guy was kind of urging her to let's close quickly. Get your inspection, we'll close quick. I'll give you a 15% off. Well, it wasn't that many months later that something was wrong with the septic, and it was actually leaking into the environment and into the river and causing huge issues. Yeah. But this was her fault now. Like it all came back on her.
It is her fault. Like it is. It wasn't a brand new property, so it is her fault. He probably knew about it, maybe, but the burden of proof is on the buyer, right? I seen a case where a buyer and seller, the property was listed with the realtor. The buyer and seller were neighbors. They went and talked. The seller told the buyer that, oh yeah, there's a well on this 79 acres. After the property sold, the buyer phoned all mad to the real estate agent. Where's my well? There's no well on the property. But you had to, there was nothing in writing from the realtor's end. There was nothing in writing from the seller's end. They tried to fight it. It didn't go anywhere. All they did was end up paying a whole bunch of lawyer fees because they had nothing in writing proving that well was there. We have a form called Ancillary Services form, and we have a checklist with the home inspection, PCS, well water, environmental study, if you want, engineer's report, all these different things that's a mandatory form we have to go through with you to make sure you guys understand these things. And that wasn't, the well water or well quality was never signed off on, so they had no proof that they even thought there was a well there. So the same thing with you, is the burden of proof is totally on her. It only applies to Saskatchewan, yeah. That's why I feel like we have some of the, we take as much liability, I think, off as possible and as real as possible, I think, compared to a lot of provinces, which I think is one of the reasons why you want to use a realtor. If you are going private, I know of a couple of places where you can find forms that were written up by lawyers that mimic our forms, which are really good to use. And I can let anyone know where they are off camera. Just kidding. But for environmental studies, I mean, a lot of that is you have to know the history of the property, right? My case in point, a family member of mine bought an office building, but it used to be a gas station site, right? But he paid cash for it. Well, he can't get a mortgage on that property because about 100 yards to the right, 2 feet down, gas had leaked in the 50s and 60s, and it's just sitting on top of the clay down there. So he'd have to either open all that up, rotate all the soil, or take it all out. Otherwise, unless someone wants to come pay cash for it, you can't do it. And this was years ago, this was before I was a realtor, but it's the same thing. I mean, you really have to know the history of a property, and in that case, it wouldn't have anything to do with the history. It's did she do anything? Did she do a home like any kind of inspections to the property? Did she get an engineer out? Did she get a plumber? Did she get anyone out? If she didn't do any of that stuff, it's liabilities on her. Yeah. So that's the toughest thing. So that's why you really have to be careful.
Question I had was, and maybe Elise has a bit more of an answer. Does CMHC or Genworth or any one of the, the guarantors of the mortgages, they change their parameters quite frequently as to what can really qualify? And the reason I'm asking that is, we just recently had a fellow that looked like he was completely able to get a mortgage with 5% down. And when it come time to remove the conditions of getting his mortgage, suddenly they had a written letter that said, we will give you a mortgage, but you have to have 10% down instead of 5%. And so that came as quite a surprise to the broker as well as obviously to the buyer.
Yeah. Well, I think Elise might be a little better at on that about how often CMHC changes stuff, because she's the one that deals directly with them. I talk to the broker, and that's about it. So. Okay.
Yes and no. It can be up to CMHC or Genworth. It depends what the client has done from when he started to when the end process is. So if there's a couple of months wait in between there and something has changed and it has to go back to CMHC, and there's a new credit bureau that's pulled, which may have happened. We had a client at one point who came in who had an 800 beacon score. So beacons go between 3 and 900, and he had 800.
Do you want to come up here? Come on. There's lots of room.
Oh, I understand. So they go between 3 and 900, and so he came in with an 800, and he had to go buy a vehicle because he'd been in a car accident. His car had total. And when he went to look for a car, he must have gone into every dealership and got a credit bureau pulled at every one. So when we went to close that deal, suddenly he was at a 540. And it was like, you're now below that 600 magic number. Everything has changed. So that could have been a problem there. The other thing is, in order to go from a 5% to a down 10%, it would have most likely have been a credit situation. But CMHC and Genworth do have red flags on certain properties. You see it a lot when you do a condo conversion. Genworth is really, really picky on that. When you have one of those old apartment buildings and they changed from rentals up to a condo and they have reserve funds and all the rest that are supposed to be done. We've got a couple of people who buy them but aren't doing those reserve funds and not doing the environmental studies. So there's an X on that until it's fixed and we can't get any money from the lenders. Brings you back to a cash situation or putting down 20 or 25% so you can avoid that problem. But no, Genworth and CMHC, as a general rule, when they go to change something, when it's going to affect everybody, they give us anywhere from 6 months to a year, letting us know this is going to be changing. There are some hesitant areas in our city. The Alphabet Soup area, they're a little more hesitant to it. It's not a bad area. There's some good blocks, there's some bad blocks. That can cause some problems, but for that particular client, I would imagine something in his credit or his income changed.
Or sometimes there's discrepancies in square footage. So if you don't meet a certain square footage, like 720, with the bank, well, I just had this happen to me also.
Yeah, you can ask for an exception depending on
if
the property has upgrades, things like that.
Yeah, but if you don't meet a minimum square footage, you don't have the upgrades.
Yeah, like I have a property that's 485 square feet. I mean, it's pretty hard if I wanted to sell it. You know, I mean, there's different lenders. Like things like credit unions, things like that, outside the box a little bit. That's not where my expertise lies. Is in lending. But you're right about credit score. Like I think that's one thing people do neglect, and one thing they think. What I've seen, especially working with Elise and working with Wes and Devin over the last 3.5 years, it's amazing that these people that have bad credit, if they just sit down with somebody, how quickly as fast as it goes down, it can come back up, and it can keep getting stronger. You just got to take the right steps. That's why when I have someone even that says like, "Oh, I'm 2 years from buying," go sit down with a mortgage broker. It doesn't cost you a cent. Like, it doesn't cost you anything, and they don't get paid unless eventually they get your mortgage. So they're not going to shoot you down. They're going to sit there and say, "This is what you need to do over the next 2 years." And I found in most cases, within 6 months, that person's ready to buy.
Or they're never ready.
Or they're never ready because they won't change their ways, right? That's the biggest thing, and you probably see that a lot with what you do. So those are the biggest things: is go sit down with somebody, even if you're thinking a year from now, 2 years from now. It's the first step to put you in the best position possible to get the house you want. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, Susan, do you want to come and talk about multifamily residence? Okay. I've never really done anything with multifamily ever, so that's why I asked Susan to be the one.
I guess everyone gave a bit of a history of themselves, so I will give one as well. I am a residential realtor. I'm also a commercial realtor. I have carried revenue property personally. I've carried 3 houses, and revenue property is more work than what we traditionally think. They don't take care of themselves, and you end up babysitting your tenants. So I'm going to speak about a single family dwelling with upstairs and basement suites in them, and then I'm going to talk about the multifamily. And that a lot of this comes from also personal experience, and I try to help my clients avoid this because the gentleman's agreement doesn't work anymore. If someone tells you something at face value, it means nothing. You have to absolutely get it in writing.
And we all make that mistake. I just went through that on a rental property. Guy hadn't paid rent in 3 months, and I think I'm pretty nice to let that slide. And the day I decided to kick him out, he sends me to the rental agreement saying I made an agreement that he never had to pay rent. And that was his excuse. But I was paying a mortgage for him to live for free. So you got to get someone ready. Believe me, my lawyer was so mad at me. It was amazing. So make sure you have some airtight leases for sure. Small town kid, I'm trusting, and you learn lessons.
Yeah. Well, this is what happens. So, like, if you don't know what you're getting into, be prepared to endure the worst learning curve of your life. So I've had houses that were just single occupancy. They had access to upstairs, downstairs. In the lease agreement, it was absolutely no smoking, no pets. You have to maintain your yard maintenance. You have to shovel the driveway. You can only have a certain amount of people live in the residence with you. Rent is due on X day. You'll be charged a fine of X per day that rent is late. I've worked with social services. That's a completely and totally different beast all to itself. Social services will not give you a damage deposit per se, but they will give you a letter or a memorandum of understanding, which then, after the fact, when you have to collect on the tenant after, you have to deal with social services. I've had property with a basement suite, so as like Kent, I'm very trusting and didn't know what I was doing, but at the time I was like 25 and I knew everything. So I decided that we were buying a revenue property with a basement suite. We went down to City Hall for the private sale. They had nothing on file saying that there's a legal basement suite in there, but the boom was on, so they're like, you know what, we're short on revenue property, don't worry about it, and we don't have any record of this house anyways, but good luck. So we had a tenant upstairs, we had a tenant in the basement, and the 2 tenants got into a fight. One moved out, gave proper notice, so it wasn't an issue. The other one got really mad. She gave 3 days notice, moved out. So not only legally was I entitled to keep her damage deposit, but she also decided to call the rentalsman on me. And she called the city, claiming that what happens is when you make the claim about a basement suite, because they're advertised all the time, non-conforming basement suite. The city won't seek those out. The only time the city will seek out a basement suite is when someone makes a complaint and it's a health and safety issue. So they will go in and they'll start with the fire department inspecting electrical, and then it just snowballs from there. So she gives her notice, 3 days, moves out, it's mad, takes me to rentalsman. I end up winning because she didn't give enough notice. She trashed the house. Then I had to deal with the city, non-conforming basement suite. Not only did I have to pay $1,200 for what's considered new development, because there's livable space down there, but they also want us to do all these upgrades. Now the house is quite a bit older, so we were grandfathered through the old basement suite system. The city, they either love you or they don't. They can make life very difficult, or they can work with you. It really depends, and it didn't matter what we did, we just couldn't meet the criteria, and it was just spending money on top of money. And at the end of the day, they tried to fine us for having an illegal toilet in the house because the previous owner didn't take a permit out for it. So we had to strip the cabinets out, we had to take all the plumbing out of the place, we had to cap everything, and the steel come back and be inspected. And by the way, that permit I had to buy, that was $1,200 for new development, I didn't get that money back either. So these are the things you need to be aware of. It's going to be a very long drawn out process. We actually ended up going to court with the city, and we ended up with like a $50 fine. And it was just to the point where it was just so unbearable to deal with, and the city was demanding to come in that they were told, which they then supplied, that they need a search warrant to leave the house. Do not be scared to ask the city to provide a search warrant. If they have just means, you have every right to exercise that option. Take advantage of it. So yeah, I sold all my rental property and I don't have renters anymore. And then a legal basement suite, that's completely and totally different. They're traditionally on a separate meter. People can pay their own power, their own electricity. If you are running on a joint meter, when you write your lease agreement with your tenants, make sure that they understand who's in charge of paying for what when it comes to the electrical and water bill. If they're going to split it, they need to understand that. It's the sole responsibility of the upstairs tenant, whatever. But you have to put that in black and white so people understand. So okay, that's what it looks like. Worst case scenario when you're managing property. Now, if you're looking at doing any kind of multifamily purchases, in order to buy multifamily units, it's considered 4 or more doors, so it'd be 4-plex, 6-plex, all the way up to an apartment building. You need a licensed commercial realtor to handle that. It's buying commercials a little bit different. You need a minimum of 25% down. Your 25% down cannot come from another loan of sorts from the bank. They want to see it in cash. But you will sort that out with your commercial lender. And by the way, so far, the best success that I've seen comes through Connexus and the other credit unions because they understand Saskatchewan. We're a bit of an anomaly as a market. So the big banks don't really understand what's going on. So our biggest commercial lenders right now on the books is Connexus. So go talk to them. Aside from that, getting into buying the multifamilies, yes, you need a minimum of 25% down. You will write conditions like, it's like a house inspection, but it's more of a building inspection. A house inspection typically costs around $450, $500. A building inspection will cost you $1,200 or more. It depends how long they spend on the site. When you view the property, you typically, if you would say you're going to buy a small apartment building, you will view what is deemed the janitor's suite, just so you can get a feel for the building. You like what you see, then you can make a request to view the rest of the units. There is some laws that have to be followed. You have to supply your tenants with a minimum of 24 hours notice before you know what's going on. As well, when you are buying commercial property or multifamily, you need to look for the financials. You need to see renting, you need to see your expenses. That's part of the conditions that you'll write on the property. And transferring damage deposits is something you have to consider and be aware of. You put new lease agreements into place with your current tenants. Something that you have to Traditionally, the small apartment or apartment buildings as a whole, they run on a boiler system. You need to get that inspected. It doesn't hurt to get a professional to come look at that boiler system, because if you have to replace, we're looking at sometimes up to $50,000, and that's a big chunk of change. You want to make sure that the building's sound and you're not in a position of having to pony up a pile of cash as soon as you buy it. Like, I mean, yes, there's a good deal, but sometimes there's a reason it's a good deal. So you need to have the cash on hand, because you're essentially, at the end of the day, you're running a business. You have things that you have to be mindful of, and it's how to deal with the Residential Tenancy Act, and it's understanding like conditions of premises, and having to give 24 hours notice to your tenants. So one thing I wanted to quickly touch in on, because people just, I don't know why they don't know this, but they just don't. There have been amendments to the Residential Tenancy Act in 2006, and they came into effect June 1st, 2009. So in 2009, I actually sat on the Social Services Board, like the Ministry of Social Services, and I had to listen to the appeals of people coming in, because Social Services was set at an X amount of dollars, and there was no policy in place for social service to adjust to the demanding market at the time, because everything is happening. So, sorry, this is 2007. To the demands of the market. So some people were paying like $200 a month rent. They had $5 allocated for laundry, and the landlords were like, "Oh, by the way, next month it's going to be $700," and these people couldn't afford to do it. So it put social services in a tough position, because there wasn't policy in place to deal with this, and we couldn't really help these people. Anyways, the boom continued. So finally, it came into effect June 1st, 2009. Rent increase notices for periodic rents, which are your month-to-month tenants, come into effect six full calendar months after being served. So if you serve notice on June or January 1, your rent increase takes effect June 1, January to June 1. Rent increase notices can only be served after 6 months from the date of the last notice was served. So you can't jack up rent periodically, wait through the year. In a fixed term tenancy, which are your 6 months, 1 year, etc., it must be in writing. The rent can only be changed during the term of the lease if it is specified in the lease when and how much. So you have to talk. So if you're going to rent a place for a year and you agree your rent's going to be $900 every month, and you're in a lease, you have to give them full warning that you may up the rent 1%. Something that needs to be understood with security deposits: at the end of tenancy, the tenant should provide the landlord with forwarding address. If they do, the landlord must send notice to tenant for claim of security deposit, which is available on the Residential Tenancy Act portion of the website, and you can get that through the rentals wing. They have 7 days to give notice for the landlord to give notice to the tenants for claim of security deposits. And they also have to let them know that if they're going to surrender the entire security deposit, or if they're going to keep any of it. Any amount that should go to the tenant should be paid to the tenant at the time. So technically, you're supposed to have your security deposits returned within 7 business days. And the tenant should immediately apply to the Office of the Residential Tenancies for hearing if they disagree. Both parties will be notified of the hearing place, date, and time. The landlord would then submit a disputed security deposit to the Office of the Residential Tenancy. So what will happen is that if you have a dispute over amount of damage deposits to be paid back, and if your tenant says, "Well, I paid $800 and he only gave me $300," when you put your claim in as a landlord, you have to supply that $500, a balance, and it's held in trust with the Residential Tenancy Act people, the rentals. And then once they make a decision, they will disperse the money as they see fit. Now, if the tenant doesn't supply any forwarding address, the landlord is not obligated to take any further steps and may take the security deposit out of trust 30 days after the end of tenancy. But be reminded that the tenant still has 120 days from the end of tenancy to dispute the security deposit in both situations. So the way that the rentals is set up is like essentially your tenants have more rights than you do as a landlord. And this goes on and on and on. And evicting people can go on and on and on. Security deposit process. If you're dealing with social services, you have to notify social services. and then you go through a hearing and all that kind of stuff. The tenant still has 120 days from end of tenancy, even if it's social services, to dispute the claim and have the hearing. The landlord will pay any guarantee received from the Ministry of Social Services. Now, by guarantee, when I dealt with social services, I just got a letter of understanding, a memorandum of understanding that, you know, if there were damages, they would cover up to X amount. Now, if you're going to dispute an eviction, tenants will provide dispute notices to the landlords in all cases where the landlord wishes to evict the tenant, including such situations of the property being sold, renovated, or turned into a condominium. The landlord applies for the hearing. Now, if you're going to evict based on nuisance, disturbance, illegal activity, or destruction of property, the landlord can apply without warning for a hearing at the rental's min to evict the tenant for the above reasons. If it appears that it is necessary to evict immediately, an eviction order will be issued. Notice will be issued. If the situation does not show a need to evict immediately, but the tenancy should end, a hearing officer may provide an eviction order on a fixed date without requiring the landlord to take further proceedings. So these are some of the things that do come up on a regular basis when people have not educated themselves on how to deal with the rental's min, and it's just better to be prepared in the long run. As well as the landlord, it's also your responsibility, even though you have to do a walkthrough with your tenants, your new tenants. It doesn't have to be on the day of taking possession, but it should be done within the first week. And you need to go through this form with them, and you need them to sign it off. Because if you are claiming that there's damage to the property, you'll have to supply this as your proof. And if you can't supply it, the odds are the rest of it you're not going to swing in favor.
So if the previous owner has the documents of the walkthrough when that person,
yeah, you would inherit those through the deal.
That one still counts? Okay.
And you should also do another walkthrough with them just for your own personal. And you need to document things. So like if you're going to manage a small apartment building, if you're not having a janitor on site, you have to be accessible to your tenants if the heat goes out or anything like that. That's a safety concern, so you need to address it right away. Everyone shake their head, yeah. It's kind of like common sense, but you know what's common sense to us is not common sense to everyone else.
I just ponder.
Well, yeah, no, that makes sense, but you will inherit. You'll inherit all that stuff, and then they will transfer the deposit over to you as well. And you should hold that in a separate account.
And they have to provide like a full set of the financials for that whole building.
Absolutely.
For 1 year or longer than that?
You should ask for at least 3 years. And, you know, like you have to be very thorough with your inspection when it comes to the mechanical, because you're not dealing with like a household furnace which is $5,000 or $7,000 to replace. You're looking at a boiler system, which I said could run you $50,000. You have to be prepared to replace it. Now, Kent and I do this all the time with doing real estate transactions. House inspector comes through, says furnace is good. 3 days after possession, furnace is not so good. Stuff happens. It's a man-made product. That's what people don't seem to understand. Like, people are drawn to brand new things because they're sparkling, they're shiny, and it's all new, and therefore there should not be any issues. You still have to ask for a house inspection because there was an issue in town not too long ago where the builder on a condo project, the plumber didn't seal the elbow joint from the bathtub. And so when they moved in, they had a bath. When they pulled the plug, it went straight to the house. That's what happens when you don't seal joints and plumbing. So because it was new, they got to, you know, it was not an issue to get it fixed. But you need to get these things checked, and you need to be aware that being a man-made product, just because it's new doesn't mean it's perfect. And there's only so much you can do, right?
And even on like a home inspection helps to give you like just a checklist for your new home warranty walkthrough, right? Because you're going to do a walkthrough a week before possession with the builder.
Yeah.
So if there's things that the home inspector finds, you already have that checklist. You know, you've already figured out what needs to be done. Because I mean, if you just do a quick walkthrough, oh, there's a paint chip, this piece of flooring needs to be changed, what have you. The home inspector is a little more detailed than they are in the walkthrough. So I think for $400,
Sure.
for $400, it's well worth it.
Something else, if you're looking at holding commercial property in the sense of like multi-families or a series of single-family dwellings for the sake of it being revenue, and you have partners involved, you need to see a lawyer, you need to get a partnership agreement drawn up. Yes, you do. Again, gentleman agreement somehow magically disappears when there's a fight. It's usually about money. So you need to understand like the terms of the partnership. You'll have to figure out a way to like remediate any kind of issues, or if there's any kind of violent option as well. And you want this stuff done as quickly as possible because when people are upset, we sometimes do stuff. So, I mean, Kent's speech was definitely nicer than mine. Mine is more the realities. Some of the stuff I've experienced, and I try to. Well, I don't try. I'm kind of mean to some of my buyers because I let them know that these things really happen, and no one was there to help me when I went through it. So I say to them, like, I'm sorry, I'm a jerk. I'm totally ready on your print. I just need you to understand what you're going to get yourself into. And then the decision is yours. But at least I'm educating you at the end of the day. And I can sleep at night knowing that I didn't sell you a raw deal.
Yeah, I have to agree with the tenancy, their tenants' rights and things like that. But if you do things properly, they usually will work out in your favor or at least close to it. I had and same with the city, I guess, if you're working with them, there are different levels of inspectors and things like that that have to go through the property. I had one in the city park that had 4 floors, 3 floors up in the basement. And it was classified as a single family home, but.
Did you have 4 suites in that building?
Yes.
Did Jackie Bucci your listing agent?
What's that?
Did Jackie Bucci your listing agent?
No.
Oh.
No, I never sold it.
Oh, okay.
Sold it privately. But anyway, I applied to have a 4-suite building, and there had been a couple of suites previously. I guess the previous owner had, told the city about them. So some of it got grandfathered in, but it was amazing what you got from 2 different inspectors.
Oh, for sure.
One would come through the place and say you have to do this and this and this. You got to put fire doors here and fire rate the furnace area and stuff like that. But and then you get that work done, and then another inspector comes out and says, well, you got to do this, this, and this, right? And so you try to keep on top of all the things that they want you to do.
But when you draw the line and say, like, I've had clients that have spent almost $50,000 retrofitting a non-conforming suite. When do you say enough's enough? Like,
Right. I must say that the city worked very closely working to get that to happen. I don't know if that was unusual or not, but the inspector's portion of it was the part that was really bothersome, because one inspector would come through and say it was fine, next inspector would come through and find something that was done before and he thought was right, was not right anymore.
Yeah, it's tough, but you need to be aware of when you buy those non-conforming suites, what happens, and if you decide that you don't want to go through the financial stress of retrofitting a non-conforming suite, that means you have to strip everything. Like you've got to take the cabinets out, you have to take the toilet, you have to take the toilet. You have to cap all that plumbing, and they have to come back to the cabinets.
Yeah, this one had full kitchens and bathrooms on every level.
Yeah.
So,
That would have been a lot.
and it would have been a lot of work. It would have been almost as much work to take things out as it was to get a couple of fire escapes and stuff going. But the other thing I learned with working with the city, if you tick somebody off, they're going to be so much harder to work with.
Oh, yeah. So,
as much as you want to run up and down one side and the other, you kind of smile and make your teeth. So,
well, it's hard because if it's the disgruntled tenant making the complaint, the city's already coming at you with both barrels, and they're mad. And you have no idea what's happening, right? Because they've skipped you and they just made the complaint, and then you're just like, oh, okay, yes, it's my responsibility. Yes, I own the property, and yes, I have to see this through. But get up on the wrong foot. You're absolutely right.
the other thing with tenants, if you're evicting a tenant for any reason at all, you have to deliver
Oh, yeah, handwritten notice.
a handwritten letter to them.
It doesn't have, it has to go registered mail, doesn't it?
No,
Doesn't have-
as long as it can be either hand delivered or you post it on the doorknobs.
But I found out in a hurry that if you do it to a tenant, that you have somebody with you that can verify that you've done it.
Or registered.
Or have them sign it.
Well, they won't sign it.
Well, my guy's still signing it, even though he caught me after this.
The one I'm thinking I wouldn't have signed it.
Something else you have to be a little bit aware of, there are certain areas of the city that can be a little bit harder to get insurance, so you need to touch base through the buying process to make sure that your property is insurable. The next agent tried to buy that acreage a couple years ago, and they put a lot of money down as their deposit. And then CMHC came in and said, no. Not only that, CMHC denied them, but insurance, as like personal insurance denied them because they were on the flood. And because they wrote no conditions on this offer, just came in and said, we'll take it, but we'll give you 50,000 or whatever it was. It was a huge amount. They lost everything. So you have to be aware of that. There, Dundonald can be a little hit and miss. Because of water issues and flooding and stuff. So, you definitely want to check in on your insurance beforehand as well. Did you know that, Ken? You should do that.
Check my insurance.
Well,
I use Connections Insurance.
Well, I know what happened to me recently was the insurance company at Saskatoon Area that had insurance based in a small town. Suddenly decided they weren't going to insure it anymore.
oh, that's happened. That happened to one of Carrie's buyers.
Luckily, I sold it before I had refused.
And understand your pearls of insurance as well. That's a completely and totally different piece. What you think you're buying for insurance, like if you think you're covered for everything, make sure you're covered for everything. I believe they're called pearls. It's like buying kind of like options on your insurance. Make sure you're covered for things like fire. Sometimes fires are even under a different pearl. And if you have a fire like at my cousin's farm, you didn't have that pearl, but you thought you had fire insurance, you don't.
But if you have a mortgage, it's not.
Or no, that's fire, no. Yes, cancer fire insurance. No. Well, they had insurance, just not right now. Any other questions? Commercial lending is a little bit different than REIT licensed.
Yeah,
You know, commercial lending.
I'm aware of it. I don't touch it.
It's a different beast.
It's
It
a
takes
hard
longer.
sell from my side because from my side of it as a broker, I have to tell the client, so on a commercial side, this was the biggest, oh my word, are you for real? As a commercial lender, you have to pay the lawyer fee for your side, you gotta pay the lawyer fee for the other side, you gotta pay the fee for my services, and you gotta pay the fee for the lender. Plus, you're gonna pay a higher interest rate. Plus, you gotta come up with more money. I'm like, I wouldn't touch it.
Yeah.
It's freaky
Very
because the word commercial means you have to have money.
And one of the conditions of commercials actually get environmental on that. It can take a long time. It's very expensive. And there's several phases to environmental studies, and it's exactly like Kent explained. Like 40 years ago, there was a gas station there, 10 feet under, and like the contamination. And even when you're looking at leasing stuff, like you have to understand how to properly discard your wastes, your waste products. Like it has a lasting impact that we take for granted that just because we can't see it doesn't exist. So you have to be aware that environmentals can be very, very expensive.
In commercial, the real estate in general can be pretty cutthroat.
Oh, it's on its own. It's so different.
I'm serious, it's really true.
It is. It's
I thought I had one all wrapped up at Fall Street building and just about everything in place, and somehow we have no idea how, because they were basically a private sale on a commercial realtor found out about it, and walked in, and although we had a contract with them, they wouldn't, carry through with mine. They waited till it would expire before, and we had about $150,000 more that she got out of it. So I mean, for the person that was selling it was fine, right? But how would the other commercial real estate about
All commercial sold.
I think it was, I got a few phone calls from, people that were looking after apartment buildings. And I suspect that maybe one of them was the bird dog for the realtor.
Oh, that happens all the time.
Yeah.
You know, because commercial's so different, and because commercial is so cutthroat, like you have to have, you know, people in your back pocket that are looking out for you, because if someone else is coming in on a deal, that other agent's like all over it. So, yeah, it's very,
No, it was purchased by that agent for himself. It was a private one for me, but it was a commercial realtor and he was the product eventually. Direct from the seller.
did you turn around and sell it?
Pardon?
Did you turn around and sell
I
it?
have no idea.
That happened where a commercial agent was clearing a property, and these people were in a position that they had to sell, so they reduced the price, and the listing agent understood how low they were willing to go, and somehow caught wind of a potential buyer. So the commercial agent went in and purchased the property through his business partner, tried to stay out of the deal, but it was connected for almost half the price, and then instantly relisted the property when it was purchased, and then sold it at the original selling price. So that went to court, that person was sued. We pay a lot in insurance, and there's a reason we pay a lot for insurance, because there's things like that. Oh, you don't have to be brilliant to be in real estate, right? So I think the most about it. It's not rocket science. You just, like Ken said, you have to educate yourself. You have to know what you're getting into, you have to understand what you are exposing yourself to, and the liabilities. And everything is textbook case scenario until you inject people into it, and then it just all goes down. Because you're dealing with different personalities. It's true though, right? You have different personalities. People perceive, how I perceive myself and how you guys perceive me are two totally, completely different things. Okay? Any other questions? Was any of this helpful, or is this like regular Joe knowledge?
Thank you very much for,
Well, thank you for having us. Thanks, Kent. That was fun.
we've very much enjoyed your questions and answers and everything that went on here tonight. And like I said before, we are doing this once a month religiously. So March 20th, I guess, is the next one, is it? And I think that one is probably going to be moved to the Cosmo Civic Center. We fully expect to have a better turnout than tonight, but any turnout is good, because any time that we can learn from professionals like yourself is fantastic, because the more you learn, the better off you are in the long run, that's for sure.
And you can get this information from the Government of Saskatchewan website, about tenancy regulations and rules and stuff, so just download that. And you can also, sorry, one other thing, when you're drafting a lease agreement, make sure you have a lawyer do it. It just helps you in the long run.
Yeah, it's totally worth whatever it costs.
It's a couple $100, like, you know, like Ken said, Saskatchewan, we have like the toughest real estate laws, I would say, in the world. Costa Rica, you can cut a deal on a cocktail napkin. Here we have like extra forms that we fill, like ancillary forms and all this other stuff that we have. And aging, oh yeah, like that's huge. And, you know, I'm happy to do the paperwork because it protects everyone involved in the deal. But at the end of the day, you need to know what you're getting into, and you need to understand that you are putting yourself for this.
Well, nice round of applause. And we'll let you know the details on the next one. So if you would like to be so kind to join us, if we're more people out, that would be lovely. That's the whole idea. We have considered having a little gathering. The CanadaREIC in Calgary has every, I don't know, couple, 3 months, they have a kind of a luncheon, learn and play board games and network. And it's quite a large gathering that they usually have on Saturday. And so if we get a big enough group of people involved here, we can consider the same thing, because Eric is saying that venue seems to be where people get most of their networking done now. And there's nothing more valuable to anybody than the networking portion of it. It doesn't matter how you go about it. You know, Don and I were down in Phoenix last winter, and you know, through a network of person that he got a hold of, it was actually in Ottawa. We started working with a group in Phoenix, and now that fellow is working with us in Washington and in South Carolina. But
Isn't it very different though?
it's very different.
That's what people don't understand. It's not a broad brush.
It's extremely different than here. Here, everybody has to go through or seems to be, have to go to the traditional bank route to get mortgages. And in the U.S., I don't know if it's any tougher to get a traditional mortgage, but it certainly is much easier to get hard money. So you can get funding on almost anything in the U.S. The only thing you have to be wary of is if it's a fix-up, you've got to have enough of a spread in there to make it worthwhile.
But not only that, their mortgage terms are significantly different than ours. Like when you buy a 25-year mortgage,
It's a 25
right,
more.
and people make those payments for the next 25 years, the same amount, how do you renegotiate?
And of course, as Canadians down there, we can't get a mortgage, so it doesn't really matter.
Well, that was the other thing I was touching on, like capital gains. So it doesn't matter if you're buying commercial property or residential for primary use, for personal use. If the previous owner is not a recognized resident of Canada, and you write a contract for purchase and sale, and they don't pay that capital gains, they have to pay 25% back to the government. And if they don't pay it, it then becomes the responsibility of the new homeowner. So on some of my deals, I've dealt with out of Canada residents, and I've written right in the contract, like 25% of the proceeds will be designated to the CRA. So it doesn't fall back on my buyer in the future. And there's other things I've written in that protects my buyer at the end of the day. And that's not common knowledge. You have to be very aware of it because immigration is exploding in Saskatchewan right now. And they are flipping houses and coming in and going very quickly. And you will be financially responsible.
Actually, I ran across one of those. There was a fourplex out in Fairhaven that an East Indian fellow owned, and he was selling it at a pretty reasonable price. And we went in and looked at it, and talking to the tenants, one of them that lived on the main floor said, "Oh, there's a whole bunch of notices to the city that these aren't legal. It's not a legal fourplex. It's a duplex with top and bottom being rented." And they, you know, I mean, they were just buying and selling stuff with an investor in Toronto.
They don't care about the legal ramifications.
It made no difference to them what it was.
Because the responsibility will always fall upon the current owner or the new owner.
But this lady in the lower portion of it, it wasn't even a basement suite, it was the lower portion, the lower and upper. I'm sure she was just about ready to go to the city and do what you said happened to you and say, you know, this isn't a legal suite. Because there was, in the back corner of her place, there was a junction, electrical box with wires hanging all over the place. They were running stuff upstairs. It was just a mess. They had patio doors on the upstairs because there was a little balcony on it, so these sliding doors. He had 2x4 nailed up there so it hold the door in place because the door had fallen. The sliding door had fallen. It was just horrible. So no wonder it was a good price.
There's a reason.
Any problem, I sold it. Maybe to another immigrant. I don't know. Who knows? Right?
You just don't want to be on that non-resident. It's very expensive. That's 25% of the sale price. So if you bought it for $300,000, they need to pay that back to the CRA. That's a quarter of your
Yeah.
mortgage. You have to come up with. Do you know how much from the CRA is?
I didn't realize that.
Oh yeah, you have to be very. So in the, especially on private sales, you investigate who your seller is, and
Yeah.
you know what, it doesn't hurt to ask for proof of residency if you are suspicious that they are not Canadian residents. You can ask for that. It's just like asking for a search warrant. They demand to see your property. That's not funny, is it?
That's not funny.
If it happens to you, it's not gonna see.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's a good thing I didn't make a huge pot of coffee tonight. Or didn't bring any cups.
Yeah.
So thanks once again. I guess you shut off the thing and then
No, I'm still recording.
if there's anything else that we can share or talk about or get together and help one another with, we should think about that.
And you guys can leave cards.
I think there's some of it on the,
Oh,
There's a bunch on the table. Do you have cards as well?
that does cards.
Do you guys mind if I take some pictures? Eric's on me every time to take pictures and get more pictures.
Can we like pose to that?
Definitely. Definitely.
he needs a better picture of us, remember?
I know. I keep trying.
I haven't even tried.
That night that we talked to him was just the two of us, and we said we were going to get pictures.
Yep.
I had no clean pants. Mind you, I wasn't even wearing pants, but I had a dress shirt, so all the pictures were top only. They didn't use any. Maybe they weren't top only enough.